All right, welcome everyone. We're diving deep today, folks, into Indian telecommunications.
Sounds exciting.
It is. We've got a whole stack of documents here on Hathway Cable and Datacom Ltd. Filings, reports, all sorts of fun stuff.
Oh, wow, the works.
You've had some time to glance over these right there. Hathway, they're pretty major in the Indian cable and broadband scene, wouldn't you say?
Definitely a big player.
Their latest quarter, ending December 31st, 2024. Well, let's just say the numbers paint an interesting picture. What were your first impressions? Anything jump out at you right away?
Yeah, actually, the profit increase, that's the first thing I noticed. Both standalone A&D consolidated, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting when you consider that their revenue from operations is pretty steady compared to the last year.
Right.
So clearly something else is going on behind the scenes, right?
Definitely something else at play. One of those behind-the-scenes things, well, it's Hathway's recent acquisition spree. They've been busy.
They have been.
Hathway Cable MCN Nanded Private Limited, Elite Cable Network Private Limited, and Channels India Network Private Limited, and that's not even all of them.
Wow. It's like they're playing Monopoly, but for real.
Yeah.
What do you think about this strategy?
Well,
Is it about consolidating their power? Expanding their reach? What's the game plan here?
I think each acquisition tells its own little story. Take Hathway Cable MCN Nanded, for instance. That one seems to be about getting a stronger foothold in a specific region.
So a strategic play for market share.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yep.
Classic move to grow that subscriber base.
Okay, makes sense. But what about Elite Cable Network? They're all about that high-speed broadband infrastructure, right?
That's right, they are. So this acquisition tells me Hathway's looking beyond just expanding their map. They want to boost their technology, too.
Interesting. So they're thinking about the future of their network.
Definitely thinking ahead. And then there's Channels India Network. They focus on content distribution.
Oh, right. So they're thinking about content, too.
It seems so. Maybe even dreaming of a whole media empire. Who knows?
Wow, a media empire. That's a big dream. It sounds like they're trying to cover it all. Infrastructure, content, you name it. But how does this all tie back to their financials?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? Acquisitions, they can be expensive. And it takes time for everything to settle in.
Yeah, you can't just snap your fingers and expect everything to run smoothly.
Exactly. So these acquisitions, they might be part of a long-term plan for growth, but they could also be putting some pressure on their current financials. It's a balancing act.
So we've got this puzzle, right? Profits are up, but revenue's stable. They're buying up companies left and right, and they're trying to make it all work together. Before we get too lost in the weeds here, let's take a step back. Look at the big picture. Where do we even start with all of this?
Well, I think it's worth taking a closer look at each part of their business. They've got broadband, cable television, and even a little segment called Dealing in Securities.
Oh.
Analyzing each of those will give us a better idea of where their money is coming from and where things are growing, or not growing, for that matter.
You know, you're right. That dealing in security segment, it's like this little side hustle they've got going on.
Yeah.
Is it even worth our time, or is it just a distraction from the main event?
I think it's worth a peek, for sure. Even though it's a small piece of the pie, it might tell us something interesting about their risk appetite or how they're trying to diversify. You never know.
Yeah, okay, good point. So we're going to break it all down. Broadband, cable television, and the mysterious dealing in securities. What else should we be thinking about as we go through these numbers? Any red flags we should watch out for?
Oh, definitely. One thing that stood out to me in the reports was the mention of exceptional items.
Okay.
These are like events or transactions that are outside of Hathway's normal day-to-day business, and they can really shake things up financially.
So like hitting clues that could point to potential risks or maybe even opportunities?
Yeah, you got it. In this case, Hathway reported an impairment of investment, something to do with some of their joint ventures and associates. Doesn't sound great, right? It means some of their bets aren't doing as well as they hoped. They also had a settlement related to an amnesty scheme for local levies.
Amnesty scheme? That sounds like they might have had some tax issues to deal with. Not great. Definitely something to keep in mind.
For sure. It's important to look beyond the surface and figure out what these exceptional items really mean.
Absolutely. And speaking of things we can't ignore, we've got to talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
This massive legal battle with the Department of Telecommunications.
Oh, yeah, that.
They're demanding over ours 3,200 crores in license fees. That's a crazy amount of money.
Yeah.
Hathway says they're going to fight it, but How much of a risk is this to their future?
It's a big deal, that's for sure. The Indian telecom industry, they have a history of these kinds of legal showdowns.
Yeah.
And they can drag on forever, eating up resources and creating a ton of uncertainty.
Right, so it's not just the financial risk. It's the distraction, too. It's like trying to run a marathon with a backpack full of rocks. How do companies even deal with that kind of pressure?
Well, they often have to create whole separate teams to handle the legal stuff while the rest of the business tries to keep going. Requires a lot of juggling.
So it's not just about winning the case. It's about managing the chaos and staying focused on the bigger picture.
You got it. And that's definitely something to think about as we dig into Hathway's performance.
Okay, so we've got a lot on our plate. Rising profits, tons of acquisitions, this mysterious dealing in securities thing, those exceptional items we talked about, and this huge legal battle hanging over their heads. Where should we even begin with all of this?
Well, let's start with something you probably think about a lot. Hathway's broadband segment.
Okay, yeah.
It's a big part of their business, right? And they're facing some pretty interesting challenges, especially with how fast the market's changing.
Yeah, for sure. We talked about how their broadband revenue actually dipped a bit this quarter. Kind of surprising when you think about how much demand there is for high-speed internet in India.
It is surprising. Makes you wonder if they're losing ground to the competition, or maybe they're just having trouble keeping up with what customers want these days. The report mentions a few things: increased competition, bandwidth costs going up, and something they call customer churn.
Customer churn. Isn't that when people cancel their subscriptions? What's the churn rate like in this industry anyway? Is Hathway's situation normal, or should we be worried?
That's a really good question. Churn, it's always a concern, but what's acceptable really depends. Depends on the market and the services a company's offering. The problem is, these reports don't give us much to compare Hathway's churn to. If we had industry averages, that would be really helpful.
So without those benchmarks, it's hard to know if this churn is a major red flag or just par for the course. It's like trying to figure out if someone's sick without knowing their temperature.
Exactly. You need that context, right? But even without those exact numbers, it's worth trying to understand what's driving the churn. Are people leaving because of price? Or are they having problems with the service? Maybe they're finding better deals somewhere else.
It's a real mystery. We need more clues to crack this case. Okay, let's switch gears for a minute. Let's talk about their cable television segment. That one seems a bit more stable, at least for now.
Yeah, the cable TV revenue has held steady. But we can't forget about the big disruptor in the room, right? Streaming services.
Oh, absolutely. Streaming's changing everything. How's Hathway dealing with this massive shift? They can't just ignore it.
They're definitely not ignoring it. The reports talk about a few strategies. They're trying to make their digital cable offerings better, bundling services, and adding more content.
So it's like they're trying to borrow some ideas from the streaming playbook to make cable TV more appealing.
Exactly. More interactive features, bundling cable with broadband and other services. They're even teaming up with streaming platforms to offer their content, trying to have the best of both worlds.
It sounds like they're aware of the threat, at least, and they're trying to adapt. But is it enough? The streaming world moves so fast, it's hard to keep up. What do you think, based on your experience?
It's tough to say. They're definitely moving in the right direction, but it's a race. One thing they might want to consider is focusing on niche content or regional programming.
Oh, interesting.
Stuff that you can't find on the big streaming platforms. That could be a way to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's about finding those unique offerings that give them an edge.
Oh.
Okay, before we move on, I got to ask about that dealing in securities segment. Is it really just a tiny blip on the radar, or is there more to it?
It's definitely a bit of a mystery. The reports don't say much about what they're doing there, buying and selling securities, but that's about it.
So, could it be a hidden gold mine? Or a potential risk we should be worried about?
Hard to say without more info. It's like finding a locked door in a mansion. You're curious, but you need the key to see what's inside.
Uh-huh. I love that analogy. Okay, we'll keep an eye on that mysterious door. But let's not forget about the other big unknown. That legal battle with the Department of Telecommunications. That's a serious amount of money, and it could have huge consequences down the line.
No doubt about it. And remember, legal battles aren't just about money.
Right.
They can be a huge distraction.
It's like trying to cook dinner while you're also trying to train a puppy. How do companies handle that kind of pressure?
Well, they usually create separate teams to deal with the legal stuff so the rest of the company can keep running smoothly. takes a lot of coordination.
So it's not just about winning the case, it's about managing the distractions and staying focused on the big picture.
Exactly. And that's something we should be considering when we look at Hathway's performance overall.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Broadband challenges, streaming taking over cable TV, the mystery of dealing in securities, and this giant legal battle. Before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to you, our listener. What's sticking with you from all of this? What are your biggest takeaways?
Yeah. We want to know what you're thinking. Is it the whole acquisition strategy and what it means for Hathway's future? Or maybe the challenges of keeping up in a media world that's constantly changing? Or is it those hidden risks and opportunities in their financial statements?
And what questions are you left with? What do you want to explore more? Remember, we're here to help you understand this stuff and learn how to analyze it for yourself.
So we've talked about a lot with Hathway, right? Their financials, their acquisitions, those exceptional items. But there's one big thing we haven't really dug into yet.
You mean the legal battle with the Department of Telecommunications, that whole thing about the license fees?
That's the one. They're saying they'll fight it, but it's a lot of money. Over 3,200 crores. I mean, it has to be on their minds, right? Even if they're acting tough.
Oh, absolutely. These legal battles, they can be a real drain, financially and mentally. They use up resources, distract management, and make investors nervous. It's like trying to remodel your kitchen while there's a tornado outside. How can they even think about growing and innovating with this hanging over their heads?
Well, you have to be organized. They probably have a whole team just dealing with the legal stuff while the rest of the business tries to keep things moving.
So it's almost like running two separate companies, one fighting the legal battle and the other trying to stay competitive.
Yeah, in a way. And that's why it's so important to look closely at their financials. Are they setting aside enough money to cover potential legal costs? Are they maybe cutting back on other investments to save cash?
Right, because even if they win, the whole process is expensive and disruptive. It's like this hidden cost of doing business.
Exactly. And it's something investors really need to think about when they're trying to figure out Hathway's future.
Okay, let's change gears a bit. Let's talk about something more positive, their acquisition strategy. We mentioned it before, but I think it's worth another look. They've been acquiring parts of all sorts of companies. Is there an overall theme here? What's the big picture?
Well, I think there are a few things going on. First, they're definitely trying to expand their territory, especially in areas where they're not as strong, like with Hathway Cable MCN Nanded, for example.
So basically, they're trying to get more customers.
Pretty much. It's all about market share. But it's not just about getting bigger, it's about getting better too. That elite cable network acquisition, that tells me they're trying to improve their technology, especially when it comes to high-speed broadband.
Realizing they need to step up their game to stay competitive.
Exactly. And then you've got Channels India Network. That one shows they're interested in offering more content. Content is king, right? You need good programming to keep people interested.
So they're building this whole ecosystem, expanding their reach, improving their infrastructure, and adding more content. It's a bold move. But is it working?
Well, it's hard to say for sure right now. Acquisitions take time to settle in, and there are always risks. But the fact that they're making these moves shows they're thinking about the long term. They're trying to set themselves up for success in a market that's changing all the time.
And that's a good lesson for all of us, right? It doesn't matter if we're running a business, managing our money, or just trying to figure out our careers. We all need to be ready to adapt to change.
I totally agree. Things are changing faster than ever. If you can anticipate those changes and adapt, you'll be in a much better position.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into Hathway Cable and Datacom Ltd. What are the big takeaways you hope our listeners are walking away with today?
I hope they've gotten a better sense of how Hathway is doing financially, the choices they're making, and the challenges and opportunities they're facing in this crazy industry.
And I hope they've learned that understanding financial information isn't just about the numbers themselves. It's about the story behind those numbers. Why are people making these decisions? What's happening in the market as a whole? It's all connected.
You're absolutely right. It's about connecting the dots and forming your own informed opinions.
And remember, folks, this is just the beginning. Keep digging deeper. Stay curious, ask questions, and never stop learning.
Because when it comes to the world of business and finance, there's always more to discover.